It's one of the oldest and most common maxims of role-playing games. A recent study by the National Institute of Dungeoneering, which, brief aside, is not a real thing, suggests that breaking this rule is a leading cause of death among adventurers. But why? Sure, it's practical, but it probably doesn't come as a surprise when I say I think there's more to it than that. In this episode of Spot Check, I ask the question, why don't we split the party?
Don't you know you never split the party? Clerics in the back, Keepless fighters hale and hearty. The wizard in the middle, where he can shed some light. And you never let that damn thief out of sight.
Before I dive into this conversation on splitting the party, I wanted to give a brief update on my dissertation progress. I'm currently wrapping up my chapter on Denton, Texas, which is the site that I talked about in the last episode, and reading that piece about Liz Larson, the dungeon master there. And a lot of what I've been doing is just really teasing out this idea that Liz has of taking reality hostage and what that means for thinking about how we interact with fictional worlds through our gaming. I'll have more to say about that in the future, but I'm still kind of finalizing my thoughts on that topic. In the meantime, I wanted to talk about splitting the party, which is a set of thoughts that I had that may or may not actually find its way into my dissertation, so I'm excited to talk about it here. Now, the way that this came up is that sometimes when I get stuck in my writing process, I've been turning to something I created that's a random analysis table. And you can see that it's a D8 table, and it has a list of people, a list of concepts, and a list of things from the fiction. And these are all related to Denton, Texas. So what I've been doing is if I get stuck and I really just need a writing exercise to get my juices flowing, I roll 3 times on that table, and then I use the result as a writing prompt. So in this case, it was Shauna, my wife, and also one of the people who played in the Nabonidus 4 campaign in Denton, space and place, just thinking about the use of space in the game and how we think about fictional spaces, and the Shamash Nadine, which are a group of assassins or ghosts in the Nabonidus 4 world. And so that prompted me to think about one of the incidents that happened while we were playing, and I'll play it for you, but just to give it in brief summary, basically, the party is about to interrogate one of their prisoners, and Shauna proposes that her character would like to go off and do something else to split the party. So as you can see, Shauna's desire to split the party in this case was completely non-controversial. No one really bats an eye. Liz has to ask some clarifying questions, and I'll get back to those at the end of this video. But it passed mostly without comment. And so seeing an exception to the rule of don't split the party got me thinking a little bit more about why is this rule there, and so that maybe we can understand why in this case it was okay to make an exception to it. And so what I think is that don't split the party is a rule based on experience across multiple frames of experience.
That's what I vote for. My character would be like, we've caught this being, we should do everything we have to get as much information out of him as we can.
I'm wondering though about taking the amber stuff to, journalist people. I think I kind of want to go do that and then come back, because I'm also not entirely.
So you want to leave the interrogation scene and take the specimen down to get analyzed.
I'd just drop it off to
Does anyone else want to accompany Anawana on that course of action?
Yeah, I think.
Analysis?
Yeah, I think the specialist definitely would want to go for the analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leilula accompanies you.
So we've talked about frames in the show before, but just a brief review. A frame is an organizing principle that kind of gathers around a particular definition of reality. So we have the in-game frame that you can call the diegetic frame or the fictional frame, where the characters are experiencing that reality as real. You have the game frame where we're using the mechanics of the game and thinking about ourselves as players. And then we have outside of that the social frame where we're interacting with each other as friends or co-gamers or what have you. And now, so to look at the most interior frame, within the fiction, characters are of course safer in a large group, and a single person wandering off is vulnerable. That's usually about the beginning and end of why, when people explain, here's why you don't split the party, it's because people wandering off inside dungeons full of monsters is dangerous. And that is very true. But on the level of storytelling, where the dungeon master and the players are working together to create a story, here the players are interacting and the dungeon master is interacting with a lot of tropes and genre expectations of what kinds of stories might come out of these experiences. And wandering off or splitting the party in this case makes the character vulnerable to the dungeon master accessing the sort of standard horror trope of protagonists splitting up to cover more ground, only to be picked off by the antagonist one by one. Splitting up the party makes you vulnerable not only on the fictional level, but on the sort of storytelling game level as well. On the mechanical level, thinking about the rules of the game, splitting the party when time and space are being carefully tracked, as when you're in a dungeon and keeping track of turns and how fast people are moving, it increases the work required by both the dungeon master and the players to track the synchronicity of events occurring at two separate locations. Knowing which things have happened at the same time and which things happen after other times gets more difficult when you have a party that's split up in a dungeon. Now, lastly, on a performative level, this can lead to a single player receiving additional spotlight time when the dungeon master spends time interacting with them about what their wandering character encounters, stage time that the other players that are still in the main group must share. So this shifting of focus towards individual players can also be manipulated to good effect, though, because if the group acknowledges a benefit on focusing on that player, splitting the party might become a good idea on the performative level. If you're introducing a new player to the game, as when I've seen this happen, a group might take pleasure as a group in watching the novice explore the world on their own, maybe going up to the next room and seeing how they react to the situation on their own, giving them that spotlight time because everyone wants to see how they respond. So across all of these levels, on the fictional level, on the narrative level, on the mechanical level, and on the performative level, splitting the party can increase the tension that people are experiencing at the table of holding this entire world together in their heads. So because the rule is based on tensions across all of these frames, I would predict that if you look at lots of actual play circumstances, you'll find more exceptions to this don't split the party rule at times when tension across one of those frames is reduced. Perhaps in the in-game reality, there's a reason that that place is not particularly dangerous. And often you do see the party being split when people are in a city or in another location where the danger is less than in a dungeon. Narratively, you might have a reduced tension because for whatever reason in that game, those horror movie split the party, take them off one by one tropes aren't part of what they're doing. Maybe everyone in the game is super powerful, and so it's a different kind of story tropes that you're going to be accessing. On the mechanical level, whenever you're not carefully tracking time and space, that's going to reduce that mechanical tension from splitting the party. And then lastly, on a performative level, like I said, sometimes people want that spotlight to focus on a particular person. So there are lots of reasons that the tensions on one of those frames might be reduced, and I think that in those situations, you'll notice that people are more willing to break this supposedly unbreakable rule of gaming. As in Shauna's splitting of the party, it didn't provoke any sanction. No one tried to stop her. But the transition was informally noted and sort of ratified. So Liz says, you want to leave the interrogation scene and take the specimen down to get analyzed. Shauna confirms and someone else in the group decides to go with her. Liz's clarification there, you want to leave the interrogation scene, involves the sort of narrative framework of scenes, asking for confirmation of whether Shauna wanted to split the scene in two or to shift the scene entirely, pushing the other players to abandon their plans for interrogation. In this case, Liz interpreting Shauna's request as a request to split the party is already trying to do some group maintenance instead of trying to abort this plan that the other people had been developing. Liz offered an option that both could be pursued at the same time. So what does understanding the don't split the party rule as an encapsulation of experiential wisdom across multiple frames do for us? Well, I think it does a few things. First of all, if you are a gamer or a dungeon master, then understanding why that rule is in place might help you find those times when making an exception will actually increase the enjoyment at the table, as when Liz was able to kind of split the party to allow two different tracks to to go on at the same time. From an analytical standpoint for the understanding of role-playing games, I think that understanding the different kinds of tensions across all of the frames of experience that are being navigated by both the players and the dungeon masters helps us to understand better what's happening at the game table and how that might apply to other places where we're navigating across multiple different frames. And in diplomatic meetings, in various social settings, we're always navigating tensions across frames. And I think gaming, as in so many other cases, brings that to the forefront and lets us look at those social processes in great detail on the surface rather than buried down as they might be in some other sorts of situations. So that, as Forrest Gump said, is all I have to say about that. Until next time, don't split the party.
That's why when we say you pay, you got to pay.